The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6533, a bill to implement the recommendations of the Federal Communications Commission report to the Congress regarding low-power FM service and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, and the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time that I shall consume.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I first want to thank Chairman Boucher and to let Mr. Boucher know that it has been a privilege to work with him during our years together on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and especially during the 2 years he served as chairman of the Subcommittee on Energy and of the Subcommittee on Communications Technology and the Internet. He has been a great colleague and partner in legislation and a great friend, and I want to wish Chairman Boucher only the best in his next steps. So I also want to thank Chairman Waxman for strongly supporting this bill that will give local communities across this country access to their airwaves. I am grateful for the support that this bill has from both sides of the aisle, from myself, the former Vice Chairman of the Communications Subcommittee, to the future Vice Chairman of the Communications Subcommittee, this bill's lead co-sponsor, and my good friend Lee Terry from Omaha. We've been working together to bring local community-oriented radio to more cities, counties, and neighborhoods across the country for 10 years now. And I would say to my friend that I think we're finally on the last leg of this journey. This bill will allow churches, schools, neighborhood groups, and others to put community-oriented programming on the air. And it will help first responders provide those communities with critical information in times of natural disasters and other emergencies. You see, when the Federal Communications Commission created the low-power FM radio service, they sought to create opportunities for new voices on the airwaves and to allow local schools, churches, and other community-based organizations to provide programming that's responsive to local community needs and interest. Congress, however, passed the Radio Broadcasting Preservation Act in 2000, and many of those organizations were prevented from communicating to their members, supporters, and residents on the FM radio dial. That bill called for a field study performed by the MITRE Corporation and for the FCC to recommend to us what we should do. In 2004, on a unanimous bipartisan basis, the Federal Communications Commission issued a report to Congress which stated that, and I quote, Congress should readdress this issue and modify the statute to eliminate the third adjacent channel distance separation requirements for LPFM stations. For a second time in November of 2007, and for a third time again on September 2009, all 5 FCC commissioners agreed that Congress should lift the restriction on LPFM stations and allow them to license new stations in more communities. The bill we have under debate today, the Local Community Radio Act of 2009, does just that. When they're allowed to exist under current law, LPFM stations have proven to be a vital source of information during local or national emergencies. And these stations promote the arts and education from religious organizations, community groups, organizations promoting literacy, and many other civically oriented organizations. Stations like KOCZ in Opelousas, Louisiana, which is operated by the Southern Development Foundation, a group active in the African American community. The station broadcasts public affairs shows, religious programming, hip-hop and Zydeco music 24 hours a day. Zydeco music is central to the cultural heritage of the Acadiana region, but mostly disappeared from the airwaves dominated by commercial radio. Or WRFR in Rockland, Maine, which broadcasts talk and call-in shows on issues important to the community on a variety of things. Those 6 other stations have their transmitters in the station's home in Knox County. WRFR is the only station that originates its programming there. and WQRZ in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, which remained on the air during Hurricane Katrina and served as the emergency operations center for Hancock County during the worst storm there in a century. But Congress has to act on the Commission's recommendations. Otherwise, similar stations are prevented from operating in communities across America. Communities like mine, which are too large to have any slots for new LPFM stations at 4th adjacent, but could fit several at 3rd. But you don't have to take my word for it. Every FCC commissioner since 2003 has vouched for this, or the MITRE Corporation's outside studies word for it either. We all know this is going to work because it already works. Currently, large commercial and non-commercial FM stations duplicate and extend their signals on these same 3rd adjacent channels that the FCC wants to also make available to new non-commercial stations. This bill has broad support, and I'd like to add in these letters from almost a dozen leaders from Catholic and Protestant faiths like the United Church of Christ and the National Association of Evangelicals, a letter from 24 national and local public interest, civil rights, local groups, and another letter from the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, and finally, this letter from the National Federation of Community Broadcasters and the Prometheus Radio Project, all who support this bill. Exactly a year and a day ago, the House passed an earlier version of this legislation, H.R. 4711, a fine bill. But the broadcasters' concerns kept it bottled up in the Senate all year. I'm pleased to tell you that at the 11th hour, in the nick of time, the various stakeholders were able to reach an agreement over the disputed language, and all of the Senate holds have been lifted. The version of the bill was supported by everyone with a stake in broadcasting. Small non-commercial stations, big non-commercial stations like NPR, big commercial stations like the National Association of Broadcasters, and this bill deserves my colleagues' support, unanimous support as well. The time has finally come for Congress to rewrite this law. The time has come to make the airwaves available to the people they serve. As I said a year ago, the time has come to bring low power to the people. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for support of this legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves the balance of time. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I request such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I think the gentleman did an excellent job. I obviously support this bill. We support it on this side. I think the gentleman has said everything, but we're going to have the also principal co-sponsor of this bill, Lee Terry from Nebraska, has also worked with you. And I'm told that you folks have worked together for almost 8 years. So this is a very significant accomplishment, and I would defend the National Association of Broadcasters because during this process they did have some very technical concerns. I understand now they're supporting it. The new concessions, I think, that they brought out, I think were helpful. Although I'm sorry it took so long to bring it together. It permits any citizen to complain to the FCC that a low-power radio station is causing interference to any full-power radio station and requires the FCC to shut down the station within 1 business day. It requires a low-power FM stations to seek a waiver from the FCC to use the most modern and efficient engineering methods to find spectrum for their station, and mandates that a full-power station that wants to relocate will be able to knock a low-power radio station off the air, but permits the FCC to use waivers and other means to find spectrum for displaced low-power FM station. I say that only because there's businesses that have in place broadcast spectrum that are have operated for many years, and their concern was that the churches, the community centers, the schools and universities and their low-power stations might interfere. And I think that was a legitimate concern. I'm glad that the National Association of Broadcasters have now conceded these have worked out, and obviously I think any of us in this body would agree that it's very important, a part of the democracy, to have some of these, shall we say, the type of stations that offer, as you say, church music and church services and hip-hop music. So, I mean, they're tailored in a special way, plus they're available for emergency purposes. So I commend you and Mr. Lee Terry, who's going to speak shortly on this. Basically, the legislation expands the opportunity for, as we say, all these groups to the 160 million Americans in the top 50 radio markets in the country who thus far have been excluded. It accomplishes this by returning the authority to the FCC for licensing decisions related to low-power FM station. Major features of the bill, which is very similar to the bill that passed the House last year, are that it fully protects full-power stations from interference by new low-power radio station. It responds to the concerns of the NPR and the NAB and protects reading for the blind services. The Senate bill added a requirement that the FCC conduct a study on the economic impact of low-power FM stations. So this is all part of the process. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself 30 seconds. I want to thank my friend for his support of the bill. I know he's looking forward to being able to listen to his favorite hip-hop music on his low-power FM station in Florida. And this has been a long journey, and we have tried earnestly to address all the concerns that the broadcasters have, and they were many at times, but I think we've finally reached a point where we all agree, broadcasters, commercial and non-commercial, that we now have a process in place that protects their interest and their concerns and allows local communities now to have this valuable resource. So with that, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
He reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to yield to the distinguished gentleman from Nebraska, who also has been the principal author of this bill, has worked again tirelessly for 8 years. I would say to my friend on the other side, AKOZ, is that the station that I should listen to for this? Okay. With that, I yield such time as he may consume to Mr. Terry.
Gentleman from Nebraska is recognized.
The gentleman from Jacksonville, Florida knows the hip-hop station. I'm impressed. But this is grassroots radio. We've had pirate radio, now we're going to have legitimate grassroots radio. This is empowering to those that have little or no voice in their communities. This is why the gentleman from Pittsburgh and I have worked so diligently over the last 8 to 10 years. Actually, it goes back almost 12 years when we helped get the MITRE study, so we could know based on science whether or not there would be interference or not. And when that study, a thorough study, came back and said there would be no interference, Mike and I began the process of making sure that we could allow on the third adjacency communities to have a licensed FM station. And that's what low power is about, community. It's not going to blast from Omaha to Lincoln. It probably won't even go from East Omaha to Midtown in Omaha or in Pittsburgh. But the reality is it will serve the community. Just in my district alone, in the Omaha metropolitan area, since beginning this process, we've had dozens of community groups contact us about when they will be able to apply for a low-power FM station. This includes the Chicano Awareness Center. This includes Catholic Charities. This includes Salem Baptist Church, which is located in the heart of most impoverished area of my district, and one of the most impoverished, unfortunately, for the Omaha area, one of the most impoverished areas in the United States and in the African American community. And one of their issues is that they don't have a particular voice for the African American or North Omaha community. So this is why it's empowering. They finally have the opportunity now to have a radio voice of which to communicate community issues. So today, Mike says this is low power to the people. It's the essence of grassroots radio. This is a day to celebrate for all of our community groups because they will now be empowered once the Senate takes this up, now since all of the objections have been dealt with in the appropriate manners. So this is truly a day for them to celebrate, and I yield back my time.
When he yields back the balance of his time, gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I just want to share with my colleagues, we've been waiting, we were told this letter was en route and it has arrived. Just for the record, this is the letter from the National Association of Broadcasters, which was addressed to myself and Mr. Terry, informing us both that they are now in support of this bill, that they appreciate the work that our staffs have done with them along with the Senate co-sponsor, and that they support the bill. Another piece of good news, CBO has scored this bill. It has no budgetary impact. The CBO score is 0. Another piece of good news for my colleagues who are concerned about cost. And last, I think it's only fair that we recognize that a lot of people have worked very, very hard on this bill. I would be remiss personally if I didn't thank Kenneth DeGraff, who staffs me on the Telecom Subcommittee, who has put his heart and soul into this legislation and is more responsible than anybody in my office for seeing this day come today. Also from the Prometheus Radio Project, Pete Treatish, Cheryl Leanza from the United Church of Christ, Michael Dahm with Senator Cantwell's office, Lee Dunn with Senator McCain's office. There have been many, many people who have worked hard. I know that Lee Terry, his staff too, has worked very hard on this issue, and that all of our staffs deserve credit. They're the unsung heroes behind the scenes that do all the work. Brad Schweer with Lee Terry's office has been just great on this too. So I want to thank my colleagues. I have no more speakers, so I'll reserve the balance of my time and give Mr. Stearns a chance to close.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers. I think the gentleman has pointed out this is a bipartisan bill. It took a while, and the National Association of Broadcasters are now supporting this. It doesn't cost any money, so I urge its adoption, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I yield myself 30 seconds. In closing, Mr. Speaker, this bill passed unanimously in the House of Representatives when it was H.R. 1147. This bill has broad bipartisan support. I want to thank all of my colleagues for their work. And I would hope that we could have a unanimous vote today on the House floor when the bill's brought up. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6533? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.